Forget slow decay. These 8 empires ended in a single generation. Within 5 decades, the greatest superpowers of the ancient Mediterranean didn't just decline, they vanished. We are talking about the complete evaporation of global trade, literacy, and order in a lifetime. If you have ever wondered how a modern society could suddenly fracture, the evidence tells a different story about our past. The official record often portrays history as a slow march of progress, but the ruins of 1177 BC suggest otherwise. Archaeologists like Eric Cline have documented a perfect storm of catastrophes that struck simultaneously. By the end of this journey, you will understand exactly how the most sophisticated network of the Bronze Age was dismantled. We will examine the literal ashes of empires and the climate data that explains why no one was coming to save them. The stakes were nothing less than the survival of civilization itself. Most people try to blame a single villain, the mysterious sea peoples, but that explanation fails to account for the scale of the ruin. If it were just invaders, why did the fields go dry? Why did the trade routes for tin and copper, the lifeblood of their technology, stay silent for centuries? Simple answers ignore the complexity of a system where every empire relied on its neighbor to survive. The emotional weight of this collapse is found in the final letters of kings who realized their world was ending. They weren't just losing battles, they were losing the ability to feed their people. When the Hittite king pleaded for grain, he wasn't just asking for food, he was begging for the survival of a lineage that had ruled for centuries. The pain of this era was total and permanent. What nobody tells you about the Bronze Age is that it was more globalized than the world would be again until the Renaissance. The first secret lies in the systems collapse theory proposed by researchers like Colin Renfrew. This means that a highly interconnected society is actually more vulnerable to small shocks. When one trade hub like Ugarit burned, the ripple effect was felt from the Nile to the Aegean. It was a house of cards. Let's follow the evidence to the city of Ugarit. In 1929, Claude Schaefer began excavating this Syrian port and found a clay tablet baked in the fires of the city's destruction. It was a letter from the king of Ugarit to the king of Cyprus, stating that his own troops were away and the enemy ships were already visible. This isn't a legend, it is a real-time report of a civilization's final hour. Step 1 in understanding the fall is recognizing the environmental shift. Scientists like David Kaniewski, using pollen analysis from the Larnaca Salt Lake in Cyprus, identified a century-long drought starting around 1200 BC. This wasn't a temporary dry spell, it was a mega-drought, a prolonged period of low rainfall that lasted for generations. The grain that fueled the Mycenaean and Hittite palaces simply stopped growing, leading to mass internal unrest. The next factor is the disruption of the tin trade. Bronze requires copper and tin, but tin was often sourced from as far away as Afghanistan. When the trade routes fractured due to piracy and local wars, the production of tools and weapons ceased. Imagine a world where the supply of electricity suddenly stopped, that is what the loss of bronze meant to these people. The technology that defined their age became impossible to maintain. Now let's talk about the sea peoples. Egyptian records at Medinet Habu, commissioned by Ramses II, depict a massive naval battle against a confederation of tribes. But modern analysis by historians like Israel Finkelstein suggests these weren't just warriors, they were refugees. They were people displaced by the same droughts and famines affecting the empires they were now attacking. It was a migration of the desperate, not just an army of the cruel. The first secret of the collapse is that it wasn't just them versus us. It was an internal failure of the palace economy, a centralized system where the king controlled all resources. When the harvest failed, the peasants had no reason to support the elite. Archaeological layers show that many palaces were burned from the inside, suggesting that the citizens revolted before the invaders even arrived at the city gates. Remember what I said at the start? Here's why that matters even more. The collapse wasn't a clean break, it was a cascading failure. In the Peloponnese, up to 90% of small settlements were abandoned within a few decades. This wasn't just a change in leadership, it was a total demographic shift. The people who stayed behind forgot how to write, leading to a 400-year period of illiteracy known as the Greek Dark Ages. Now it gets interesting because we can see the physical evidence of this climate shift in stalagmites. Researcher Daphne Langat analyzed fossilized pollen and cave formations in Israel, suggesting that the Levant suffered a sharp decline in rainfall that peaked exactly when the cities fell. This provides the why behind the what. The environment withdrew its support, and the political structures were too rigid to adapt. This is the part most people miss, the resilience of the survivors. While the Hittite Empire vanished completely, Egypt survived, but at a terrible cost. They lost their empire in Canaan and retreated behind their borders. The loss of international trade meant that the pharaohs could no longer afford the grand monuments of the past. The Age of Gold was replaced by an Age of Iron, born from necessity and scarcity. Transitioning into the cultural impact, we see that the collapse allowed new groups to emerge. Without the shadow of the great Bronze Age empires, smaller nations like the Phoenicians and the early Israelites found the space to grow. The vacuum left by the giants was filled by the ancestors of the modern world. It was a brutal pruning of the human family tree that allowed new branches to flourish. This is exactly how the University of Tel Aviv achieved a breakthrough in understanding the timeline. By using radiocarbon dating on charred seeds found in the destruction layers of Megiddo, researchers confirmed that the collapse happened with terrifying speed. The data shows a cluster of destructions within a very narrow window, supporting the idea of a sudden, synchronized failure across thousands of miles of coastline. Further proof comes from the Dead Sea. Geologists have measured a subsurface water level drop of more than 50 meters during this exact period. This physical record of environmental catastrophe matches the frantic letters found in the archives of Ugarit and Hattusa. The earth itself recorded the famine that the scribes were too busy dying to finish documenting. It is a haunting alignment of nature and history. We can also look at the isotope signatures in bones from the era. Studies on skeletal remains from Mycenaean sites show a significant increase in nutritional stress, which means chronic hunger, during the final generation of the Bronze Age. These people weren't just fighting wars, they were starving. The skeletal evidence provides a human face to the abstract data of climate change and economic collapse. Before this video, you might have seen the ancient world as a series of disconnected legends. Now, you see it as a cautionary tale of hyperconnectivity and environmental fragility. The 1177 BC collapse reminds us that no empire is too big to fail when the foundations of food and trade begin to crumble. The stories they removed from the record show that civilization is a fragile agreement with the earth. While the great palaces of the Bronze Age are now just dust, the lessons of their sudden silence remain. Understanding the past is the only way to ensure our own future doesn't become a deleted chapter.